You're good to go.
Okay. Okay, yes, since Councilmember Hall's here, others may come in as we go ahead, but it is after 4. We will go ahead and get started. And the main topic, the ones we're talking about tonight are really in either Ward 4 or Ward 7. The Iowa Street one, that might be Ward 2. Anyway, go ahead and start. We kind of just continuing this agenda item from last week. Ran out of time, and so today's agenda item will be just about a discussion regarding on-street parking restrictions for Lincoln Avenue, Iowa Street, and Acres Street. And staff has prepared some information to present to us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just kick it off here, and then David Riesland, our traffic engineer, is going to step in and take you through some of the slides. That's a great introduction that we have been working actually for several months, probably 6 months or more on these, just actually haven't been able to get back to the committee because of COVID and other issues. But I think 2 of these cases come to us from council members and neighbors, and one of them comes to us from Embark Norman. So 3 different cases of on-street parking issues. The general thought would be to restrict on-street parking for various reasons. So you've seen these before, and each of these are kind of unique, as they always are to us. So I'm going to let David Riesland take it from there. He'll take you through the background of each case and our staff recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll start sharing my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
We'll just do it that way rather than go through an actual slideshow. Just a little bit about on-street parking characteristics. Generally, these types of things happen on local streets or collector streets. Local streets are generally 26 feet in width, thereabouts. Collector streets about 34 feet in width. You've got to have 8 feet to allow on-street parking. That leaves the minimum lane for moving traffic at 9 feet. The overwhelming majority of residential streets in Norman with these types of restrictions are on local streets that carry just over 200 vehicles per day, and they're generally located near OU, near a busy elementary or other type public school, or maybe a highly used neighborhood park. So if you look at the situations on both the residential and the collector streets, if we allow parking on a local street, that leaves 10 feet. If you take away the 8 feet, that leaves 8 feet on both sides. That leaves 10 feet in the middle for one lane of traffic, and that's appropriate for a road that carries 200 vehicles or less. If you take 8 feet away on both sides of a 34-foot collector street, you're left with 18 feet, which allows you to move one lane in each direction. That's a 9-foot lane. Again, that's the minimum width for moving traffic. And that's appropriate for roads that are in the 500 to 1,000 vehicle per day classification. There's 2 different areas where on-street parking prohibitions show up. The first is in Chapter 20 of the Code of Ordinances, and the other is in Public Works Procedure 3-001. We'll start off with the Code of Ordinance, and this is most relevant to the discussion on residential streets. Section 20-807 says parking, stopping, and standing prohibited in other areas. No person shall park, stop, or stand a vehicle where prohibited by a sign. So that particular instance of a sign is what we're talking about, and that's where Public Works Procedure 3-001 comes into play. This is just a picture of that procedure on the right-hand part of the screen. That's a typical no parking sign that we show. This particular procedure was formalized in 1996, but it's really been around for more than 50 years. It's a neighborhood-driven process, requires 60% of eligible petitioners. Residents must weigh in. The process can often be contentious between neighbors. There's rarely a situation where it's unanimous on the street to restrict all the parking unless you have a single owner. Again, it's mostly used in the neighborhoods around OU's campus, public schools, and city parks. The procedure was amended in 2018 to allow council the authorization to establish parking restrictions when considering certain factors and adopting the restriction by resolution. Normally, we have 10 to 12 formal inquiries per year. That varies wildly, as you see below. 2019, we had 8, 1 in 18, 2 in 17, 7 in 16. This is what the Public Works Procedure 3-001 says. The request has to come through the City Transportation Engineer's office. The request can be either made in writing or verbally. The transportation engineer or his designee will review the physical layout of the area and provide guidance to the requesting party. That guidance includes a map of the area showing the affected units, the number of living units affected by the request, and whether or not the city would consider the request in the first place. More about this procedure, part 3. Further processing of the request will be withheld until the petition is turned in with 60% of the residents affected by the no parking designation being received within the transportation engineer's office. Once he receives the petition, he will verify that the signatures are fixed properly to the petition, that they actually live on the street, and that it's valid. If that 60% criteria is met, we fabricate the signs and install the signs, and that's kind of the end of the story. If it doesn't, that's where you all come in, that you have the ability to create a no parking area for other reasons. Some of the considerations that you might want to make are what type of street is this on? What is the housing density on this particular street? What type of input has there been from the property owners? Are there any public safety issues? And we'll generally will tell you that when the request is presented to you. What are the traffic volumes on the affected street? This number 6 has been invoked one time in 2018 for new parking restrictions along Sims, Apache, and Jenkins. You did those all in one resolution, I believe. So the process, again, the citizen contacts staff. Codified restrictions are discussed with the citizen, and if a problem involves a violation of a codified restriction, then Norman PD is contacted for follow-up enforcement. If there is no regulation being violated and the citizen wishes to have more restrictive on-street parking, then we turn to Public Works Procedure 3-001. We provide the citizen with a copy of the procedure so they understand what we're doing, along with an aerial photo of the area highlighting the properties that are eligible to sign the petition using ownership information from the Cleveland County Assessor's website. If the petition is returned, signatures are validated and percent support is calculated to meet or exceed that 60% criteria. We establish the parking restriction and install the signs appropriately. We issue a press release and notify Norman Police Department for follow-up enforcement of that new parking restriction. And this process can also be used if a citizen wants to remove or modify an existing restriction. So who's eligible to participate? Well, anybody who resides on or owns property on the side of the street targeted for the restriction. Property owners or tenants can sign the petition, but if both sign, we're only going to accept the owner's position as the one who owns the property. They would overrule the tenant. Here's an example of a letter that was sent back to a citizen on Monnett Avenue, along with a copy of the petition that would need to be filled out. Here is the returned petition. He's also, in this example on the map, they're showing the affected residents that would need to be contacted. Signatures were validated, and we found that we had 60% support for that restriction, so it went into place. Here is one on Wyandotte Way, went through the process. It did not meet the 60%. It only met 50%, so we were not able to move forward with the restriction. The requests that we're bringing to you tonight, one of them is in the 1300 block of Lincoln Avenue on the east side of the street. The request came from Mr. Robert Kerr. He did not have a petition. The parking in the area is predominantly by OU commuter students. The west side is already restricted. ADT is about 675 vehicles per day, and the street width is 26 feet. This restriction on Iowa Street, the 1200 through the 1700 blocks, would actually could be both sides of the street. The request came from Mr. Eugene Album. He did not have a petition. Parking is predominantly by residents. There are no current restrictions in this area. We contacted the police department and the fire department, and they didn't report any problems responding to emergencies. Average daily traffic volumes of 1567 and a street width of 24 feet. And the third request, this was the one that was submitted by Embark. For the 100 through the 300 blocks of East Acres, the restriction request is for both sides of the street. They did have some petitions. They got 60% on 2 of the 3 blocks, but not on the 3rd block. Parking in the area is by residents. There are some parking restrictions in the area. The road is currently striped. It carries a bicycle route, has an average daily traffic volume of 4,530 vehicles per day, and a width that varies between 22 and 26 feet. This is the area where the parking occurs in the 200 block of East Acres on the north side. And here's some pictures that we were able to get showing movement of traffic westbound on Acres having to cross the double yellow line. The picture on the left is an Embark bus. The picture on the right is a Northern Public School bus. You know, so it's not a good idea to have people crossing the double yellow if they don't have to. And again, that box at the bottom shows the area that we're targeting with this particular request. So, summary of the conditions and the recommendations. Lincoln Avenue between Farmer and NC Street, pretty low traffic volumes, less than 1,000 vehicles per day. Minor traffic operational problems. There was, again, no petition, but parking is already restricted on the west side of the street. It's the only segment of Lincoln Avenue that doesn't currently have a parking restriction on it. And the restriction would impact OU commuter students who park on the street for free. Staff recommends the new restriction. Iowa Street between Sherry and Berry. Moderate traffic volumes, just over 1,600 vehicles per day. Minor traffic operational problems. Again, there was no petition submitted. Parking is already restricted in some areas, but not in these particular blocks. But outside of these blocks, there are restrictions. The impact would be to area residents who lack sufficient parking spaces in their garages or their driveways. Because there was no submission of any petition, we don't recommend any change until we see a petition that comes with hopefully 60% level of support. And Acres between Jones and Porter, moderate traffic volumes in this area, a little over 4,500 vehicles per day. It is a designated city transit route, a designated bicycle route, provides access to the Central Library to the west and Longfellow Middle School to the east. There are significant traffic operational problems forcing drivers to drive left of a double yellow stripe, including school buses and Embark buses. Petitions were submitted. Again, not all had the 60% requirement, or we wouldn't be talking about this one now. Parking is already restricted in some areas. The impact would only be to the residents in the area. Staff would recommend restriction on both sides of Acres between in the 100, 200, and 300 blocks. With that, we'll take questions.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation and the information. Just a couple clarifying questions from me, and that was Iowa Street. You mentioned it has sections of it that are already restricted on both sides, or parking is currently allowed on both sides the whole way?
it's kind of a mix, to be honest with you.
Okay. What I would maybe, and Councilmember Hall may have a different opinion about it, but I definitely agree. I would like to see them, at least circulate a petition on this one, and see what comes back. But I would be interested in restricting parking at least to one side of the street and have that be consistent the entire length of the corridor there, kind of regardless of what happens with the petition or not. I would like to see it restricted on one side of the street and it be consistent the whole way through, would be my recommendation. Just to make sure. And then on Lincoln Avenue, some of the changes we've seen over there recently is that OU has constructed, well, they'd already built one of them, but they just built a pretty large new parking lot in between Headington Hall and the existing parking lot that they had constructed a couple of years ago. So I don't know what the cost is or the rules are about using that parking, but there is a whole lot of new parking lots in that area that is kind of, I think, help inspired this change a little bit from the residents in the area. So any question, Councilmember Hall or anybody else?
Yeah, I have a few questions
Okay.
for you. Let's just start with the one. I think the one that is the most straightforward to me is the one on Lincoln, for the reasons that Councilmember Holman just mentioned. I went over there and took a look at that too. So there is ample parking. So if the commuter students are the ones that would be affected the most, they're not going to be displaced. They're going to have an option for parking. So I'm comfortable with that. And I also like the idea of completing that street from Lindsay all the way down Lincoln, because every other part of that block has restricted parking, I believe. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that one, I think that one to me is the most straightforward and the most clear cut. I was curious. So the person who submitted the request, I'm assuming they have to be a property owner on the street, but I don't know that for sure. So the person.
Robert Kerr on Lincoln Street is a property owner on Lincoln Street.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
just to clarify, council members, the staff did encourage both Mr. Kerr and Mr. Alvin to generate the petition and go the normal route, and neither one of them wanted to do that.
okay.
And that's it's rare, but whether they just didn't want to do it or didn't think they could do it, but that's the case where we bring it to you all for your action.
Okay, that was my next question. Is there some reason why the petition route wasn't pursued? And that was the property owner who requested this did not have the energy or the interest to go the petition route. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. We're not sure why, but they just refused to do it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, how this all works. So, yeah, I don't, at least it's not apparent to me that there's any real negative impact on not requiring on this one to go back and see what the interests of the neighbors are, because there is alternate parking that wasn't there before, and that the rest of, I think it's can't remember what 100 block is, but it is restricted parking on both sides right now. So that one I really am comfortable with all the way around, and I think that's what I'm hearing from you too, Councilmember Holman. So that one is the most straightforward. So the one on Iowa, also agree. I've been up and down that street many, many times when I lived over in that neighborhood, and I would like to see, are we talking about restricting parking on both sides, or?
I think the way the request came in is it could be one side or the other. I think the individual wanted a restriction.
Okay, just on one side though?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, I wasn't real clear on that. So, okay, yeah, I support that. There are a lot of houses along Iowa, so I I agree with your recommendation that they maybe should go back and try to do the petition process, and at least get the neighbors involved. There aren't that many properties on Lincoln, but on Iowa, there are quite a few. So it seems like they should at least give it a go. That would be my assessment there. So before we get to acres, I want to ask a couple other questions just to make sure I understand. I can remember when this was amended in 2018 as to giving council an option to get involved with these things with the parking, and it really does have a big impact in Core Norman. So on your chart in 2018, there were 2019, there were 8 requests. Do we know how many of those were granted, or is that what we're talking about right now? We're just forwarding these 3?
I don't have that information readily available about
Okay.
how many of those might have been
Okay.
approved.
I just was wondering because, that's a pretty good sized number. It was 2019. I don't know when those were submitted in 2019. And obviously we've had some dramatic slowdown in our ability to get things done in 2020. I'll just call it the COVID effect. So I just wondered where those 8 were in the process, or if there was petitions that went with them. So I'd be interested in learning about what the other ones were. So I'm assuming that these 3 are part of the 2019 batch.
I think that's correct, Councilmember. And I'm remembering several that did get their 60% and went through the conventional process. So I'm guessing maybe these are 3 of the 8, and the other 5 went through the normal
Okay.
conventional petition process.
So if they went through the normal process, we wouldn't really ever hear about them. You would just move through the process, certify the signatures, and the request would be granted.
That's
right?
correct. Again, David mentioned we do a press release. We always try to do a courtesy email, either from me or the city manager, to the council member directly impacted, just so you know that
Okay.
it's coming. But yeah, that's it.
Okay. And then I was interested, and you did cover it, but one thing that I'm not sure I'm aware of, if it has happened in the reverse, can you think of a recent instance where, let's just say the neighbors have succeeded with the 60% petition process to restrict parking? Have we had any instance of other neighbors trying to come back to reverse it?
I know that there have been at least one where somebody has tried to start that process, but they never went through the process.
Okay. Because I can see over time, certainly in some parts of Core Norman, where, the turnover in occupancy in the neighborhood, that could change over time, where a neighborhood's worked really hard in the past to restrict parking for whatever reasons, and then with the turnover in the neighborhood, that enough people might come along to reverse that. Because the other thing that I think has been a part of this, but I am just thinking about this in a new way. When you talk about the tenant being able to sign the petition, yet the property owner trumps the tenant. So if you have an address, and let's say it's a duplex and there's 7 tenants in a unit, are we looking for one representative per address, or can 7 tenants sign for one address? How does that work?
I think it's one per address.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better. I just wasn't sure about that, because I could see where that could pose problems along the way. So when you're collecting and certifying signatures, it could be the property owner, or it could be a tenant that represents that address. But and that would be in the case that maybe there was an absent property owner and had trouble getting a hold of that person, a tenant could sign in that person's place. But if the property owner shows up, then the property owner would trump the tenant.
Yes.
That's correct. And that's happened. I'm remembering a few cases where the tenant wanted to do it and the property owner didn't.
Yeah. Okay. let's see, I think that was, okay, that was that. All right, so now we've already started this discussion, haven't we, Mr. O'Leary, about the acres,
Yes.
the acres request. And I just want to say that I generally am in support of the request. It makes perfect sense. I went and took a look at that myself to make sure I understand. There's already some parking restrictions in place on the between the 100 and 300 block, and there doesn't seem to be any issues with that one way or the other. I just carefully reviewed to make sure that everybody within that 100 to 300 block has an option for off-street parking. But we have maybe one of the most unique situations. You all may be aware of some other properties where this exists, but the property on Acres, the 200 block of Acres, is a house that was constructed in 1896. My understanding is it was first constructed and located at the corner of Acres and Peters, and was moved somewhere along the way. And so traditionally that block of Peters, the lot size was from Peters to the drainage channel. So this house has literally been delivered to the back of what would have been the original lot, I guess. I don't know how else to say that. But there is no parking on this parcel. And I don't even know how we describe this parcel because it was formerly part of another large lot. So I'm really concerned about the homeowner there because she has made use of the on-street parking for decades. And she has no option currently. And I know city staff is willing to try to work this out. But this is just a really unique situation when we're talking about restricting parking. And people might be unhappy because they can't park 4 cars in their driveway or whatever. But in this instance, she literally has no option on where to park her car. I just found out that she does own 2 cars. She does have a disability, so she has a handicap sticker. So we've got that issue as well. There is a drainage channel on the east side of her property and an alley, a very narrow alley that is absolutely frightening to drive down because I just did it today. And on the west side, there seems to be very little setback on either the east or the west. I can't really determine on the north side, but I just am putting it out there. I already have started this conversation with Mr. O'Leary. What are our options to try to accommodate this extremely unique situation?
Sure, Councilor, and we agree completely. Rarely would you find a case like this, just that not having any options at all. So that is as you said, that's a unique situation here. We sure would love to find an option that she or any future owner tenant would be comfortable with. And again, the council has a fair amount of latitude. We get a little uncomfortable as a staff spending public dollars on private property, so we're very comfortable and very frequently are building driveways and replacing driveways and that sidewalk section across the driveway. That's something we do every day. So that's a very normal thing. If we could agree on a place on that frontage, particularly on Acres, it looks to us like there's space there on the west end of the parcel to bring a driveway in, open the fence and that sort of thing. And then we just couldn't see, as you said, we just couldn't see much in terms of the northern portion of the parcel. It looks like there's space back there to come off the alley, but there's a bunch of trees too. So we have not gotten in there to be able to see it. So as you and I discussed, we just would love for this tenant or owner rather to tell us what she would like, and then we can try to find a way to help her with making that happen. Certainly before any parking restrictions took place.
Okay, well, I have made contact with the owner. Have not had a chance to follow up with you, Mr. O'Leary. But, I can, pass along some information. Obviously, she has a lot of concerns about this because this is just something that's been her routine and what she's accustomed to. So some of the things that were brought up as issues on her part is there is a retaining wall on the, as she describes, there's a retaining wall on the west side, the south side, and the east side, and but not on the north side. So I don't know how that impacts things. She was wondering, do we have any precedent or procedure or consideration of closing the alley?
Certainly, the vacation or closure of alleys happens, I don't know, frequently is probably the wrong word, but you had one on your last agenda, or maybe it's coming up on Tuesday, relative to the Cleveland County, the well project. We're closing an alley there. That's a council action, and it goes through district court as well. So yes, closure of alleys is something that council does occasionally. Usually it comes to us from the property owners, kind of like the parking thing here. We rarely initiate that because, again, we feel like we're taking something away from them. We never want to take things away from properties without
Right.
the property owners initiating that. So, but certainly council has the authority to initiate that. Generally, the property owners have a fair amount of authority. Catherine can speak better for the legal side, but the property owners can oppose it, and generally council has not closed alleys if there's opposition to it.
Yeah, because clearly it would involve more than this property owner. And so I didn't know if you've even had an opportunity yet to evaluate that as an option when you were, you know, considering some of these things.
We have not. Happy to do that. We just, again, our inclination is usually to not even consider that if it looks like it's being used, and this one does look like it's being used, but we're
Well,
happy to see that.
just to fill out the picture, part of the charm of Core Norman and these very historic old neighborhoods, this alley is constructed on what I understand is a WPA era drainage channel. And so it goes from Acres through to Hubert. It seems narrower than some of our other alleys. I don't know if it's just because it's overgrown. I don't know if you know what one way or the other, but it does seem very narrow. The other interesting thing is there's a little wooden footbridge or some type of wood bridge in the middle over the drainage channel that allows access to, I believe, probably rental property on the east side of that channel. So there's that to consider. And, just to make it a little interesting, the property owner that we're talking about has a lot of knowledge of all these structures. And so this rental property was formerly a chicken coop. So there's that. But anyway, so that's gonna definitely would impact access for that resident, because as far as I could tell, that would be the only access that that person would have to parking. So I think we need to consider that. And then I don't know, it's just hard to, it was hard to evaluate how it would impact the rest of the alley. And I don't know if you have some information of, is that important? I mean, why would that be important to keep open? I
I
just
can
don't.
sure do some more investigation. Happy to do
Okay.
that.
Yeah, well, let's look into that a little bit, because that doesn't seem real clear cut either, because of the interesting little bridge that's there, because that's going to impact, maybe create another set of problems for somebody else. But I would like to take a look at that. And then if we can be successful, which I'm working towards right now, if we can be successful in getting together city staff with the property owner to discuss options, because I think you all believe that there could be a workable option off of acres, and that you would be willing to allow a curb cut there, I believe. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's an option. Closing the alley is an option. Somehow working with the homeowner to figure out how she could get parking on the east side of her property, or possibly behind the house. Well, not north exactly, but it's hard for me to really understand what kind of space she has for a driveway or for parking. So I think that's where I am at the moment. Yes, I understand the need for what we're doing. Obviously, I'm really happy that we have a bus route to the library, and it is a bike route. We do have school buses going down there. But I would like to see if we can't find some kind of reasonable accommodation working with the homeowner before we finalize all this, because I think you mentioned, my understanding is that the 100 block and the 300 block do have the support of the residents
That's
to
correct.
restrict the
Yeah.
parking. Yeah. So, and I think is she the only one in the 200 block, or is there one other?
I think there's
The-
two, if I'm remembering it right.
Okay.
And she opted not to sign, the other one did, so that's not 50%.
Okay. Okay. So that's kind of where I am currently, and would like to take a little bit more time to see if we can't find some accommodation. And as I told you, Mr. O'Leary, happy to try to get that help with any kind of negotiation that we need to do, but would like to look into the alley, because she did bring that up as a possible solution that she could embrace. And the fallback was one of the questions I asked, and I just want to make sure this is out there too. There is currently there are no parking restrictions on Beale Street.
That's correct.
So worst case scenario, anyone in the 100 to 300 block of acres would have an option to park on Beale Street, not as permanent parking, but there is parking available on Beale Street.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think that covers all of the options that I'm aware of that might be possible. Anybody else have any other better ideas?
So on acres in front of the property, there's a little bit of right of way between the sidewalk and the curb, the existing curb. In front of their property, they've got pavers and some rocks and flowers and stuff. It doesn't look very well maintained, but I don't know if there'd be an option to maybe take a little bit of our right of way and still allow for there to be I don't know what utility might be in there right now, but move our curb a little bit to the north there, closer to their property, so there could still be a room for a parallel parking on that side of the street, and so that, and enough room so that cars wouldn't have to go over the double line anymore. So maybe that could be one option, is slightly widening the street by a foot or two, I guess, if there's no other use intended for that little strip of right of way.
Yeah, and we did throw that around too. So
Okay.
you all want to weigh in on why that's not your favorite?
Not ideal, I can assume,
Yeah.
but
Sure. No, it's great thought, and we may end up going that direction. Our thought was, once you open that door, you're creating the inset parking. Of course, all the other neighbors are going to want that.
yeah.
And that's, in fact, that sort of is the center city standard. That's exactly what we're trying to design and build on all of our new redevelopment areas. So we really like it for that reason, and for the same reason here. We just thought maybe another more conventional driveway option might be better in this one single case.
I think that would probably be my preference, is a if a driveway could be worked out, perhaps. But that I wouldn't be opposed to, that street parking, and
Yeah.
that would keep another driveway from crossing the sidewalk, I guess, would be the
Mhm.
positive of that. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I'm happy to keep that one on the table too.
Sure.
yeah, so yeah, that's a interesting little situation with that old property. You said 1896. That's
Yep.
maybe, I don't know. Is that the oldest house in Norman? I'm not
It
sure.
could be. I think it might be. She thinks it's either the oldest or one of the oldest, and I think it was moved to that current location in I think like 1916, something like that. So yeah, I mean the inset parking could be um, maybe the most straightforward solution. And I realize that um, we're always interested in setting precedents, but I'm pretty sure there's not going to be anything else like this that I'm aware of, certainly, and trying to solve this issue. So I'm open to all possibilities and working with the neighbor to find something that's going to be mutually acceptable to the city and to her.
Very good. We'll explore all options. Appreciate all that feedback.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you
So
so
to
much for all the information.
So
You're very
just
welcome. If I could just summarize what I think I
Yeah.
heard, Mr. Chairman. So on Lincoln, that one sounds like we can bring that one forward to council and just proceed, as we will in the form of a resolution. Sounds like Iowa, we want to go back and see if we can get the neighbors or this gentleman or others to circulate a petition for the one side restriction. Maybe get them to take some initiative there. And then of course on the acres, we're going to explore these options for that 200 block. I think we're probably going to go ahead with the restriction in the 100 and 300 blocks just to do the best we can to make it safer for the buses today. Those are more conventional petitions, and we'll work on that 200 block with this driveway situation before we bring that back to you.
Okay, that sounds right to me. I also recall there was, I can't remember exactly, but there being some discussion, maybe either Councilmember Hickman or Councilmember Hall, about West Sims or going further on West Sims.
Yeah.
And looking
Thank
at some of those.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because I revisited that too. That was the whole parking issues on West Sims, I would say, from Flood to the railroad tracks has been intense conversation over the last few years, and probably one of the things that spurred the amendment to allow council to consider parking restrictions. So I took a little deep dive into that too and tried to refresh my memory. And so most of Sims is, well, the entire 100 to 800 block on West Sims is no parking on the south side, which is great. So we have a consistent run there of no parking on the south side. And then you can divide it in half from the 500 block to the 800 block, which is where that would be from Park to Flood. There also is no parking with the exception of game day. So essentially, the 4 of those 8 blocks already has no parking on either side. So and I think we addressed the 100 block with the option of council to intervene in 2018. Do I have that right so far?
Yes.
Yeah. So currently there is parking allowed on the 100 through 400 blocks on the north side, and the 100 and 200 blocks are where the new construction is for our small apartment townhouse area, and that side of the street is normally just packed and full of cars. The 300 and 400 block also allows parking, but there are rarely any cars there. So I don't know. I have not heard in the recent past anyone who's particularly unhappy with that still having street parking in the 100 to 400 block. Have you all gotten any feedback from
I'm not
residents?
aware of it. David, are you aware of any activity?
No, I am not.
Okay, because I just wondered, it was a hot topic certainly 2 years ago, but I think we've solved part of it with the parking restrictions that we've completed on one side of the street for the entire 8 blocks. So ultimately, it seems like it would be nice to have that consistent all the way through on the north side. But if there's not current active conversation or complaints about that, I'm happy to let that evolve for a while. And if we do start having more feedback from the neighborhood or from I haven't heard that it's an issue for any of our emergency vehicles. I'm assuming you all would know that if it was.
We'll follow up. Again, we're not aware of it. They normally come to us pretty
Okay.
rapidly if they're
Okay.
feeling
So
concerned.
it would be helpful to me to just have an update from how you assess it from the city side and emergency vehicle site triangle, how it's going to impact James Garner. If that's an issue for you, it may be.
Right.
But like I said, from the neighborhood side, who would be initiating a petition, I think we've solved the problem we had 2 years ago. But I also would like to just reassess where we think we are if we need to move forward and do anything else.
Very good. Consider it done. We'll follow up and check in with our partners at
Okay.
PD and also just do some background checks ourselves.
Yeah.
Happy to
Okay.
bring
Any
that back
other
to you.
input from you, Councilmember Holman, as far as issues?
Yeah, I think part of it too might have been looking at trying to make sure the parking restrictions were consistent. So if parking was allowed on the north or south side of the street, then that's what it would be allowed on the whole street, instead of one block it's on the south side and the next block it's the north and the next block is so trying to make sure it's the same on whatever it is. So but yeah, I haven't heard any other anybody reach out about any problems lately. So okay, that I think covers that as far as that agenda item.
Thank you. Yes.
The only miscellaneous comment I have, Sean, is if we could get maybe in this committee or maybe study session, I'm not sure, council could get an update on the status of the Cedar Lane and 36th Avenue project.
Sure.
I've had a few people reach out to me about it. And I told them, we have a project, voters have approved it. It's being designed, all that stuff, but just for new council members especially. But I remember that being one of our locally funded projects too, I think.
That's actually one of our federally funded projects. So
Okay.
the timing is good. Maybe next month, and that'll be a good one for the new council member from Ward 5 there to get an update on that. But so maybe if we can, next month we'll bring that back to you. And that's also goes into this business that we talked about last week of rescheduling the projects, and we'll know better. In fact, David is the one preparing those applications this year. We'll know better next month exactly where that project falls in terms of construction funding. We are under design, so we have a very high level of design. In fact, we've been working pretty closely with the developer. West Point, the Farzani Group, is the primary landowner of that whole Jetson's Landing there, particularly on Cedar Lane. And they may actually get ahead of us. And in that case, they would actually have to do the improvements on Cedar and going down the intersection. So that's another variable that's been kind of bouncing around here the last few months. So we'll get you an update next month if we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Any final comments from Lee, staff, anybody? I'm interested in where Catherine is at right now with that library ladder sitting behind her. That looks pretty cool. What'd you say? That's your house?
My house, yeah.
What?
We're big readers, so.
Yeah, wow, that's pretty cool.
This is like the one thing my husband insisted on.
I was thinking you were at like OU or something, right? Somewhere.
No.
Okay, well, cool. Well, I appreciate everybody, staff, all your work, and Councilmember Hall. And we will go ahead and adjourn and see everybody next week.
Thank you all.
Much. Thank
you.
you.
did you? I didn't do anything. They just went off and